Hello everyone, welcome back to Tanny Studio. Brandon here with a new art supply review video. Today we will be painting with the very famous Himi Gouache 24 paint set. I'm going to be transparent here, I haven't used gouache in almost 2 years. The first time I used gouache, it was from an $8 set, and even after trying my best, it came off very chalky and flaky, failing to get that smooth layering that gouache is known for. So I do have an everlasting negative first impression of gouache that made me very nervous trying this out. But hey, I heard many good things about Himi. To begin the review, this Himi gouache set cost around $26, but I paid around $23 for this set because Amazon had a deal at the time I ordered this. I really love the paint case, it's simplistic and very clean looking. The information regarding the colors is on a label at the bottom of the case, which is very helpful. The lid is very easy to pop off from the sides. The set will contain a painter's palette inside the lid that is meant to lay your paints down and do color mixing as well as spread it with water, which is really great. The set will come with 10 paint brushes. I will tell you this, gouache is recommended to be used with soft brushes to get a smooth texture. Later in the video, I did wet the brushes to soften them up. Some of them were somewhat soft, but not very soft, so I was a bit iffy on that. However, I do appreciate the fan brush, the brushes with a firmer edge, and the finer detail brushes, so these brushes did get my hopes up a bit. As you can see, when you open the paint set, each paint pod will come in their individual pod with a peel-off lid. However, based on how the pods were packaged, getting them out was a bit tricky. I will say that. I had to tug on certain pods hoping they would pop out so I could peel off the covers which will have the paint color's name on it. However, some were stuck and that's why you'll see me open the paints in a weird order. I scraped the peeled off covers against the walls of the paint pod so I could save as much product as possible. From this video, you will see that I am a very messy person. I got so much paint on my hands whilst I was peeling off the covers. If you see my hands going off screen, that was me using a wet paper towel to clean off my hands. This is how the paint set will look after you're done unpacking. What I always recommend you do with a new paint set is to swatch it on a scrap piece of mixed media or watercolor paper, especially with paints like these. That way you will have a better idea of what you're putting on paper. I am really glad that the set offers 2 shades of red, an ultramarine, and 2 shades of yellow. The mid yellow is a bit more of an orangey color though. Here's my little chart of the colors and the swatching. I do apologize for the bad handwriting. Now here comes the fun yet most nerve-wracking part, painting a piece with these gouache paints. Here I have a page from this mixed media sketchbook with a bunch of random pumpkins, candies, ghosts, cats, and teddy bears. I actually sketched this page out like in October of 2021. Wow. So I decided to go ahead and use these gouache paints on this page to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I wanted to use as many colors from the gouache paint set as possible without mixing, just so you can see the actual result of using these paints. I do want to say that despite the great color offering the paint set offers, please still do color mixing as much as possible to help yourself learn color theory and to get more organic color results. As you can see, I'm mainly using the palette to help add water to the gouache paints. I know artists are advised to use a painter's knife to scoop out a small chunk of paint to reduce paint contamination. I unfortunately don't have one, so I apologize that I'm just using the paint brushes to scoop out the paint. The paints are very easy to collect on the paint brushes. They're very buttery and fun to get out. When you lay down the first layer of gouache, you should add more water to help the spread, so that's what I'm doing here. Honestly, I was doing quite a few things I would normally do with watercolors, but I had to remind myself that gouache is not watercolors. One concept that I kept in mind is to allow the initial layers to completely dry out before I add a new layer. That way I can get a smooth, opaque texture that gouache is known for. Then when you paint the next layer, don't mix as much water and the layer will be thicker. I will comment that you do need to use quite a bit of product to cover up more area because the gouache doesn't spread very much on its own. You can add more water, but the layer will be thinner. I was doing my best to get a smoother consistency as I painted, but I was kind of having a hard time even after I layered. I used brushes 2 and 5 mainly, but I did use the firmer edges of brush 4 and 6 to help get smoother results. I will say this, the smaller detailed brushes were a bit tricky for me to use, they didn't get the finest details. For the color choices, I used the orange for the pumpkin and I shaded it with a Ponceau red. The cat I initially painted with a violet, but I didn't like it because of the color value contrast, so I used a pale purple on top. The nice part about gouache is that if you mess something up, you can use layers to paint over and cover it up. The ghosts, I used the acid blue, jade green, and I did mix some violet with the acid blue to get a periwinkle color. I needed to use a third color that wasn't too similar to the others. The ghosts, I used more water to get a watercolor transparent effect and it worked. I used the ochre brown for the teddy bears and earth yellow for their tails and ears. The ochre is a nice brown color, but it was a bit darker than I expected. The candies, I used the purple 064, it's the one that looks more like a baby pink color, and I did mix the jade green and the deep red to make a very dark mossy green color. For the record, I did the little color mixing again to add a bit more variety to the colors I was laying down. I used the pale purple and lemon yellow for the stars, which laid very smoothly, and I used the sky blue gouache for the wrappers. Here's how this page in my sketchbook ended up. The gouache for the most part was doing its job, but I didn't get that completely smooth, buttery texture that gouache is known for. I wasn't too happy with my color choices as well. I think I needed more distinguishments between the values. I do need more practice though. Therefore, I decided to do another filming of me using the Himi gouache set, now that I got my feet wet with these paints. Luckily, I did the neighboring page as well, where I had a sketch of Crystal Witch Girl from an old video of mine that I also did around October of 2021. I apologize for the change of scenery, by the way. I was visiting my parents and I decided to film there. Anyways, I also decided to be a bit more free in the way I paint, meaning that I would do more of the techniques I normally do when I paint. For example, I will be using the Transcend art brushes that I got from Amazon as well. They had a very soft touch to them even before I wetted them, so I was a bit more hopeful when using them. I will also do much more color mixing. Since I was at my parents' house, I scooped out the paint using a plastic knife because they had a bunch that were laying around, which was kind of helpful actually, but I had to scrape off quite a bit of extra product so I could preserve it. I made a black using the violet, orange, and jade green paints and mixed them together for a more organic black. I made a brown by mixing Ponceau, medium yellow, and ultramarine, but I made a bit too much. I then began the painting process, and already I was having an easier time spreading the paint with the Transcend art paintbrushes than what was provided in the Himi gouache set. I like the black that I created from mixing, and like before, I was very conscious to let the initial layer with more water dry before layering. Another tip I give for painters is to paint a separate piece of the painting whilst you wait for another piece to dry. That way you don't have any bleeding with colors. That's why you see me doing the hair next. Then I used my brown that I created with mixing on the broomstick. It was a bit too dark, but it was alright. I used the orange the Himi gouache set provided for the cat. The hay part of the broom I mixed with the earth yellow and mid yellow to create a brighter sienna color. For the skin, I mixed the earth yellow with white, deep red, and even a tiny bit of violet. If you want fairer skin, use more white. The stripes on the cat, I mixed the Ponceau red with lemon yellow, and it turned out to be a darker orange color still. I layered with a thicker mixture of paint, but it still wasn't completely smooth. That's alright, I knew to let this layer dry and then add another layer after it's done. The white that the Himi gouache set offers is fantastic for covering any stray spots, but only parts where it is meant to stay white. I even used the white to outline features that were covered in black. Trust me, white has its place in line art. For the background, I used the ultramarine for the upper half of the sky, and I wanted to do the gradient effect with the violet on the bottom half. I started out by covering the page in water so that it spreads easier without drying and blotting things up, and it somewhat worked. I think I should have painted the background first and then layered the witch girl on top of that. That's why some gouache artists do what's called an underpainting, where you do the background colors first and then you paint the main objects on top of that. At least I know for next time. As you can see, I kind of failed on getting the gradient effect and the paper was starting to tear. I know gouache is supposed to work with mixed media, but I personally would rather use watercolor paper next time so that it holds together better. Nonetheless, I continued layering until the background was more vibrant and strong. I used the white paint and a toothpick, believe it or not, with some help with a finer paintbrush to create the stars. Again, the white paint is fantastic. I decided to use the pale purple, white, and a mixture of the violet and white to make clouds. The pale purple was the base for the clouds, then the white was the highlights, and the violet and white mixture was the darker shades. To make the cloudy effect, I just wrapped the paper towel around my fingers and swiftly patted it on the canvas. With that, here is how Crystal Witch Girl in the Sky turned out. I was pretty happy with the piece, far from perfect, and I do have much more to learn, but overall, I'm very excited to continue using the Himi gouache set. You will definitely see them in future videos. I overall think it can achieve a lot of really great effects and realism with more practice, and it can create really smooth effects with softer brushes and proper layering. I do highly recommend getting a set of softer brushes alongside the paintbrushes provided to help yourself out, and definitely use a watercolor canvas. Overall, I do recommend these paints for beginners. Thank you everyone so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.